you weren't here for a while. Okay, I put it on there yesterday. Okay, let's start talking about rivers. Initially, on rivers specifically, what two rivers are Americans going to use the most to trade on, do you think? The Mississippi and the Ohio, because one cuts this way, one cuts up and down. The Hudson, after canals, you're right. What's the problem, though, with trade on a river?
It's hard to go back up.
Yeah, it's kind of one-way traffic, right? It's like being downtown Lexington. Lots of one-ways. In fact, what oftentimes would happen, you'd be trading on what's called a flatboat, right? And you would trade, you go downriver, and you either had to get some sort of mechanism to haul your boat back up north or east or west, or you had to actually have a big giant stick, a keel, and you would actually row yourself back upstream. Yeah. You know how hard it is to row a big giant boat upstream with a big stick and pole, right? And doing that, it's like 1 mile an hour. Working your darndest to go 1 mile an hour. So rivers, which are natural trade routes, aren't used as much until 1807. This begins to change. Because what? Because the invention of the steamboat. Okay, and with the invention of the steamboat, Robert Fulton and his ship the Clermont starts. He went from New York City to Albany on the Hudson River, and he made it in 32 hours, which was a record. And with that, it changes the way Americans trade, right? As time goes on, specifically 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, these rivers become two-way highways. And then so you see even more cities begin to pop up along big trade routes. This is actually when Pittsburgh becomes even bigger, right? And you start getting towns like Cincinnati and Louisville. Along the Mississippi, places like Minneapolis, St. Louis especially, and the South will actually begin to be a little more connected because they're going into Mississippi. And what city do you think becomes very important in the South?
New Orleans.
New Orleans does, right? New Orleans is actually a pretty cosmopolitan town that wasn't always just ultra-South, right? It had so many people coming and going. New Orleans has sort of a different flavor than a lot of southern towns. I mean, still a lot of segregation and stuff, but... So by... you have to write this down. In 1820, there were 60 steamboats on the Mississippi River. Sorry, by 1820. By 1820, there were 60 steamboats. By 1860, there were 1,000 steamboats. The Mississippi River, you watched it. It were just boats going up and down. Many of you are in AP English, right? And you'll start reading, hopefully soon, you'll read some Mark Twain. No, you're not there yet, are you? You'll read Huck Finn. And is that your next book? It's great. It's great. I read it when I was your age in my English class. And this is what he grew up with, right? With the Mississippi just being chock full of the stuff. And this is how trade is happening. And so you have towns that began to be population clusters, right? Population centers around these towns. And trade manifests, and this is going to be a way that our economy spreads. It's also going to be a way that these cities become more powerful, right? And they start to get sort of cultural identities. St. Louis, what's the most famous thing in St. Louis?
The Arch.
Right, the Arch, right? St. Louis is the gateway to the West. This is where Americans, right, this was what in the West, and then Americans start moving in this direction. So now think about it. These places here, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, as they're slowly being developed by the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, there are routes to get their goods where they want to go, and this especially happens with the advent of railroads. Railroads don't spring up like in 1800, but by the 1830s and 40s they're beginning to pop up, and by 1860, America has more railroads than all of Europe does. Where do you think most of the railroads are? No, not the South. Think about it. Railroads are about moving people and goods, right? Where are the most people and goods? The North. Almost all of them. 3/4 of them are in the Northeast. Today, we don't use trains much to get places, right? You guys are like, I'm going to jump on the train and go to Louisville.
I really want to.
It is not uncommon, and you oftentimes see this if you watch TV from New York, people who live in the D.C., Philly, New York, Boston area, jumping on a train and going down is not an uncommon thing, right? A lot of people who live in New York, and I know Harley, your family's in New York, like your sister lives in New York or
Yeah.
close to it.
We go to Albany and we take a train to the city because it's really expensive to drive.
Yeah, to keep your car in New York and stuff, because parking is ridiculously expensive. And train travel is sort of the way to go do it. Europe is way more in trains. I don't know how Switzerland is, but trains are pretty wonderful, aren't they? I don't know if you love trains. I love trains. Trains are wonderful because you don't have to, you can sit there and just talk and read. It's fast, way prettier, doesn't go, you know, you're not roads everywhere, you're kind of going through nature a lot of times. Train stations are awesome. I'm like Sheldon, I'm a really big fan of trains. So when I was in Europe, I went on train travel. But the trains themselves are also going to cause problems. Now I want you to start looking at something. I'm going to show you something on the map, 3 maps. And I want you to see westerly if you see any big patterns. Alright? In the west, I want you to see if you can see any patterns. This is a map of Native American battles. And obviously the further west tends to be the later times, right? The movement west signifies that. Okay? Do you see this map? Focus on the west and midwest. You see that? Okay? Now I'm going to show you the map that you've been looking at. Right? These little things are mining, and these are in industry. So now look at the Midwest and West in this. Okay? You look at that map? Now I want you to look at this. Specifically, westward train development on that map. What trends do you see?
As people move west, when you see more Indian complex because they're encroaching on their territory.
Maybe, but you're reading Barry Mahara Woodading. Almost every Native American tribe in the West. Again, let's look at this. Don't we see? Yes.
Like the battles and the mines and the railroads are all in like the same spot.
The battles, the mines, and the railroads are all in the same spot. Do you think this is a gigantic coincidence? You know how many coincidences happen in American history? Or any history? Not a lot. Alright? Native American battles, Native American battles, Native American battles. Huge mining centers, huge mining centers, huge mining centers. A lot of railroad production, a lot of railroad production, a lot of railroad production. Do you think this is a random act of industry? Native Americans would be pushed onto reservations, but what would oftentimes be found on those reservations? Minerals would be. And minerals are bringing opportunity for people. So who begins to move west? People. And if you're a business leader, if you own railroads and people want to go west, what do? Build some railroads. So that brings huge population, right? And as huge population goes on to areas that are either on reservations or close to Native American populations, what inevitably happens? Conflict. Native American battles, and they're pushed off again, and they'll stay at whatever reservation they have until more minerals are found there, or until the BIA agents would screw them over and force Native Americans to move off the reservation, leading to more conflict. Right? Anyway, there you go. One thing we're also going to see, because of all these railroads, during the Civil War, this is one huge reason why the South was able to win, because of their industry and the railroads. If you look at the 2 biggest wars in American history, do what? What did I say, the South?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If you look at the 2 biggest wars in American history, the Civil War and World War II, the end results over time were very predictable. Whoever had the best ability to produce the most and transport the most always won. Look at the North's industry. Look at the South's industry. Right? Almost all the railroads were in the North, and hardly any was in the South. So what can you do if you're a general? What can you do if you want to get your troops somewhere fast? Put them on a train. What happens if you want to get them supplies and food? Put them on a train. What happens if you're the South and you're running out of troops and supplies?
You walk to the train.
Run real fast. See where I'm going with this? In fact, one of the problems of the South actually probably lasted longer was the North couldn't get their crap moving down that fast. Because when most of the war was fought in the South, they got screwed over by Southern lack of infrastructure. Let's see the thing.
Couldn't they just like sabotage the trains?
Do what?
Why don't they just sabotage the trains and that would like...
Who, the North or the South? Well, they tried, but the problem was most of the stuff was in the North, almost the entire. And you started to stop already.